Oh my goddess. There's a reason goddess worship is one of the most misunderstood kinks in the BDSM world, not least of all the counterculture idealism it requires. For some people, it's treated like an aesthetic. For others, it's confused with ego stroking or fetishized femininity or erotic performance. In actuality, when done with understanding, it's a powerful and intense way to see or way to live. It can deepen devotion, connection, and it may just be the answer to the age-old question that so many submissive men struggle with. How can I tame my fucking ego? Hello, my pets, and welcome into The Dungeon, the podcast for submissives to learn, grow, be entertained, and ultimately find empowerment in their submissive selves. I'm your host, KatNash, the Music City Dominatrix, and today we're going to talk about what goddess worship actually is and what it is absolutely not, and how real-world ancient goddess worship kind of gives us a blueprint for doing this ethically, powerfully, and without delusion. This episode is not about role-play scripts. It's about orientation to power, and I want that line to sort of sink in as you're listening to this episode, because that's the fucking key. I recently had a listener ask me for ways he could practice goddess worship. He described his dynamic with his partner in which he truly revered her and wished to worship her in everyday life. But outside of foot worship and, typical submissive service, he was struggling to find ways to live and embody this idea of goddess worship. Now, my personal ideal dynamic has always been one that had the energy of, I'm an embodied goddess, and my submissive is kind of like the top warrior of the tribe, or the king who kneels at my feet and serves me. This is the ultimate dynamic for me. It's my dream relationship, if you will. So naturally, as soon as this listener asked for my advice, I was like, okay, this is an interesting study. I had to dive into research. And what I've come to understand in my studies has actually shifted how I see and will experience goddess worship going forward. So thank you to my listeners for inspiring my learning and growth. I absolutely love to learn new things. So this was a really fun episode for me to research. So first of all, I think it's important to state the obvious. Goddess worship is not original to the kink world. Long before kink communities existed, goddess worship was a religious, cultural, and political reality. Across history and cultures, goddess worship shared a few striking characteristics. Number one, through all the different continents, the goddess was not required to perform. She was also not accessible by default. She did not prove her worth, and her authority existed before any actions that she may or may not have taken. For example, in Nepal, there is a very intricate belief system and rituals surrounding the goddess Telechu or Telehu. A real life living girl is believed to embody the goddess and is then worshipped by the whole society. What's most impactful about this situation is how she is worshipped. She doesn't command, she doesn't instruct, she doesn't explain herself, and yet kings bow before her. The politicians kneel in front of her. Crowds fall silent when they're near her, and even people's movement slows in her presence. And no one tells people to submit. They simply do. Her authority flows toward her. And it's expressed through the restraint, reverence, and the self-regulation of others. She literally just sits there. She doesn't do anything, It's a girl. It's like a preteen girl. But that's the core of goddess power. Power is revealed by what others do in response to her presence. In this case, there's no erotic access, there's no intimacy, there's no entitlement. Her body is divine and it's untouchable. It's divine, and it's not because it's desired, which is something that I think we need to grasp a hold of more firmly in our society, is something becomes divine when it's desired, when it's a hot body that becomes more worthy. And that's just not the case, you know? And this matters deeply when we talk about kink. Another example that I want you to keep in mind when reframing your idea of goddess worship is the goddess worship that's done in ancient Egypt of Hathor and Isis. This goddess worship was directed towards the statue images of goddesses. So what I'm talking about is not a living embodied human. It was the way that they goddess worshiped, and it was done towards statues. Every single day, priests and priestesses would bathe the statues every day. They dressed the statues. They offered food. They laid flowers before it and lit incense around it and spoke and sang praise to a statue. You think the statue's thanking them? No. Do you think it was rewarding their efforts on demand? Do you think she was negotiating? No, it was a fucking statue. Service was not transactional. It was devotional. The act of service was the point. And this is crucial because in kink, goddess worship collapses the moment a submissive believes service entitles them to attention, validation, or access. That's not worship, that's bargaining. Now, don't get me wrong, negotiation is an important aspect in many kink scenes and dynamics, but goddess worship is one-sided. It's a devotion for devotion's sake. Now, how the goddess wishes to express herself or reward the devotion, if at all, is entirely up to her. Of course, keeping the devotee's limits within consideration. It is about the flow of reverence and devotion to the goddess for simply being. Not that there will not be very tangible benefits for the submissive from goddess worship, but it's not an equal relationship. The devotion is the ultimate reward. So let's continue with more real-world examples. Ancient Greece. The worship of Artemis and Demeter. These are great. The worship of these particular goddesses, it involved pilgrimages, fasting. This isn't fun shit, you know? Like, it was sacrifice. It was initiation rites. It was the loss of identity and psychological transformation. The goddess was not there to comfort ego. She did not exist to soothe insecurity. She demanded alignment. Get your shit straight, you know? And this brings us to kink. When well done, goddess worship in kink is symbolic, consensual, and psychologically informed. It's not about pretending a woman is divine. It is about consciously orienting power, reverence, and submission towards her authority. It's an adjusting the frame of mind. It's the perspective of not just who she is, but who you are in perspective to her. Goddess worship in kink is a voluntary surrender of authority. Goddess worship is ritualized reverence, and this is going to be deeply individualistic. This is probably what my listener was hoping for, a bunch of tips, tricks, hacks, and ideas. How can I goddess worship? How can I play goddess worship, right? But the key to true goddess worship is being genuinely curious about your goddess, about her likes and dislikes, her interests, etc., and then using empathy and thoughtfulness to serve and please her. It's about intentional restraint by the submissive. Restraint not only from what she decides to restrict from him, and goddesses, may I suggest orgasms? That's just my 2 cents. But restraint from his more unsavory, yet entirely socially acceptable chauvinism and bigotry, which honestly exists in most men to some extent in society. And to be clear, I can only speak for the American man here. I suspect that it's to a lesser degree in some countries, like the Scandinavian countries, for example, and to a greater degree in some other extremist countries. So recognizing and reprogramming that inner dickhead is the key. Goddess worship is power expressed from the goddess through withholding, not access. Devotion does not demand reciprocity. The submissive adjusts themselves. The goddess doesn't chase devotion, she receives it. To better understand goddess worship, let's briefly go over what goddess worship is not. Goddess worship is not a dom constantly performing superiority. Goddess worship is not a submissive demanding attention because goddess worship, hello, I'm worshiping you. Goddess worship is not erotic entitlement disguised as reverence. It's not validation farming. And it's not a woman playing therapist, savior, or mother. And to be clear, a woman is and can be all of these things in moments, but it's never something to be expected, you know? Goddess worship is not submission that collapses when it's ignored. And man, is that a big issue in dom-sub relationships. Real goddess worship can survive silence. If devotion requires constant reassurance, it's not devotion. It's insecurity. Now, insecurity is not a dirty word here. We all have insecurities at times and over certain things. But I think that it's really important to recognize our insecurities and actively try to heal them when they arise. And I myself have been guilty in the past of being like, well, I'm really insecure about this, you know, and just accepting that as fact. Like, this is one of my insecurities, and that's it. That's me. No, I think it's important to intentionally grow from and try to fix them. And the way that I do that with my insecurities is, number one, recognize when I'm acting or thinking from a place of insecurity. And then number two, finding examples in real life that contradict that belief that's behind the insecurity. And I think that this is honestly the best way to change any programming that you're currently operating out of in your life that you don't wish to have anymore. And to be clear, all of your beliefs are programming to some extent or another. But let's get back to goddess worship. The biggest misunderstanding is she must act divine. Wrong. Historically, goddesses did not prove divinity by doing more. They proved it by being the reference point. Others adjusted. Other people waited. Others humbled themselves. And in kink, this translates to the goddess doesn't need to respond immediately. She doesn't need to reward every act. She doesn't need to explain her authority. Her power exists before the scene begins. Her power exists outside of any actions. She simply is the goddess. She doesn't have to act a certain way. She doesn't have to look or dress a certain way. She already is the divine feminine, simply by birthright. Now, if you are a submissive diving into a lifestyle of goddess worship, you'll be pleasantly surprised to discover that the more you accept this idea and embody this idea, the idea that she is a goddess to be served and worship how she desires, you'll find that this fucking magic happens. She becomes more of the goddess, more goddess-like. When a woman feels seen, accepted, and empowered and safe, she'll begin to blossom into her most embodied and divine self. And this is outside of what you think a goddess should look like. If a woman feels truly safe to express herself and become more fully herself, it's absolutely awe-inspiring to see a woman becoming. It's one of the most fucking beautiful and magical things on earth. And honestly, it's exactly what this world needs right now. But I won't get started on that. So let's delve a little deeper into this idea of reference point. My chicken is going crazy in the background. Shut up. When we talk about the goddess being the reference point, we're not talking about someone who performs. Seriously, I'm going to go have some chicken pot pie for dinner, y'all. Okay. We're not talking about someone who performs authority or gives constant instructions or actively asserts dominance like I'm about to do on that fucking rooster. Yeah. A reference point is something far more subtle and far more powerful. It's the axis around which behavior naturally organizes. Think of like the planets rotating around the sun. In most systems of power, authority is demonstrated through action, through speaking, through directing or correcting or enforcing, A reference point, on the other hand, operates in the opposite direction. It does not move to manage others. Instead, others adjust themselves in relation to it. In physics, reference points do not chase motion. Motion occurs relative to them. The same is true in human systems of reference and authority. Historically, goddesses did not prove their divinity by doing more. They were divine because they were the central orientation of meaning, of ritual, and of behavior. People traveled to them. People waited for them. They structured their time around the goddess's time, and they interpreted meaning from their presence rather than from the goddess's instructions. When this concept is applied to goddess worship in kink, it becomes immediately clear why so many dynamics fail. A femdom ceases to be the reference point when she's required to constantly reassure, to explain herself, to perform superiority, or to manage a submissive's insecurities. In that moment, power reverses direction. Instead of others orienting towards her, she's orbiting their need for validation. And that's not goddess worship, that's caretaking. Most importantly, the submissive begins to self-regulate in true goddess worship and in the reference point. Instead of needing constant correction, they adjust their own behavior, they refine their own service, and they internalize her standards. This mirrors religious devotion, where obedience continues even in the absence of direct supervision. A true reference point doesn't require consistency in the way that we usually understand it. Ancient gods and goddesses weren't predictable, yet they were revered. Reference point authority allows for withholding, it allows for mystery and selective engagement without collapsing the structure of devotion. The center remains stable even when attention fluctuates. And this is like perfect for femdom and submissive dynamics because femdoms, women are so naturally dynamic. It's going to fluctuate. It's important to say this clearly and ethically. Being the reference point does not mean ignoring consent. It doesn't mean withholding agreed upon care or manipulating emotional dependence. In healthy kink dynamics, the symbolic goddess role exists within explicit agreements, in ongoing consent and appropriate aftercare. Powers chosen, not assumed. The reference point operates within the container of trust, not above it. So why do those who goddess worship love it? Why do they do what they do? Some reasons are it orientates them towards something greater than their ego. There is a sacredness. Some of them derive meaning in their life through service. Some experience order through reverence. And this is a huge one for those with ADD, ADHD, or OCD tendency. The peace and order that comes from giving decision-making and authority to another. And some subs experience identity through devotion. This isn't a weakness. It's a desire to belong to something structured, intentional, and hierarchical. There's a deep craving in a lot of people out there to experience the safety in such a structured and hierarchical dynamic. In a well-cultivated, communicative, and consensual dynamic, a goddess worship femdom relationship has the potential to be mind-blowingly sacred, a huge connection, and very deeply fulfilling for both parties involved. Ultimately, goddess worship is not about how divine she acts. It's about how willingly others orient themselves around her authority. If nothing changes in the submissive's behavior, mindset, and self-discipline, then no amount of kneeling, praise, or pretty language makes it worship. At its core, the idea is simple but profound. A reference point does not manage devotion, it receives it. A goddess does not act dominant to prove power. Power is revealed by how willingly others orientate themselves around her. For many submissives, this is deeply compelling because it offers relief from the constant self-direction. I'm going to say that again. Power is revealed by how willingly others orientate themselves around her. And this is deeply compelling because it offers relief from constant self-direction. A reference point provides psychological gravity, not force, not coercion, but something steady that allows surrender to feel safe, meaningful, and intentional. And to me, the trial and error, the growth, and the consistent work that it takes to develop such a powerful and intense connection and dynamic with the right person, with the right partner, sounds not just hot as fuck, it just sounds idyllic, you know? What do you think? Thank you for joining me this week on Into the Dungeon. I really had a lot of fun researching and contemplating a successful goddess worship relationship. I realized it's not about the actions, it's about the mind frame, and then everything else just falls into place. Feel free to reach out with other interesting show ideas, questions, or comments. I love hearing from listeners and fans. You can find my contact info and personal offerings at www.KatNash.com. I'm also on FetLife, KatNash, or just email me directly, thewildcreatrix@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode, even a fraction of the amount I enjoyed thinking about and writing it. Be sure to join me next week where I have a special guest talking all about high protocol. And until then, as always, stay kinky, my pets.